All right. Well, Joe, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Nice to be
Great.
here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. I want to just start off with the thing that is on everybody's mind, the pandemic,
Right.
coronavirus. I'd love to get your thoughts as someone who, as a Western trained medical doctor, but also as someone who studied the soul and spiritual healing and really you seem to be able to balance these two systems of knowledge. So I'd love to get your perspective on the pandemic and how you're thinking about it, how you think we should be thinking about it as a culture. Anything else you want
Yeah.
to say about it?
Well, I mean, I think as a medical doctor, I think, it's the risk is very real. It's a big concern for everybody. So all the preparing for the worst type of, maybe not huge percentages of people are going to die it seems to be the case, but still the rapid threat to high numbers of people that's going to challenge the healthcare system and healthcare delivery and all the rest of it and subsequent economics, like it's a big deal. So I think there's people and kind of like, I don't know, I would say like, whether it's, I think everyone's accepting it as a very serious threat. Sometimes I might run into somebody from kind of maybe I would call it like a new age circle or whatever that's trying to play it down, or that maybe, with the right vibes that, we get through it. And yeah, I'm not sure to me, that's not really relevant, you know. I guess as a doctor and stuff. I mean, of course you want to take care of yourself and live well and do all those things. And yeah, it's like, guess what? We got malaria in the Amazon and strikes the ayahuasca healing centers all the time. Everybody there knows that. So I think it's just first issue is that yeah, it's a very real threat and a problem. I was just talking to somebody, a friend of mine from integrative medicine community, who's also very much like medical and also spiritually oriented. And her comment was like, it's like the great projector, like wherever people are at, they're projecting all kinds of stuff onto what it is. We hope that, first of all, the roughness of the tragedy is still upon us, and so just the suffering, the loss of life, and the difficulties around that, the economic difficulties, like we're just still in the midst of that. And so some people, we that yeah, there'll be some kind of a some kind of she was talking about how she found in her life that working in a hospice was a big transition in her life that really got her being around death like that is what really kind of woke her up to wanting to address, her current life, her past life, all that stuff, really start working through that. And so she just made the comment that without the threat of death, there's the complacency is is more. And so if people are gonna like be reevaluating the society and the culture and all those kind of things, like yeah, the threat of death is a major influence in getting people to kind of consider reorient themselves, to what's going on. And that without that, she was saying how like there's been these generations that just haven't there hasn't been, there of course there is suffering and there's been war and there's people have been hit in all different ways, but like a mass unified where the entire society is affected more completely, that hasn't happened in a while. And so she says there has been kind of a growing complacency about, health, all kinds of things, the
Right.
role of
The
compassion.
assumption that we're all going to live to be 85 or 100 or more
Right,
is not
right.
necessarily the case.
That's it. And then that like that aspect of life in medieval times and or in the United States in the 1800s or earlier decades is just has a big influence on how people approach their lives. You know, the urgency, the immediacy of the moment, and themselves, all that stuff, and facing death, you know,
Yeah,
preparation
if
for
we
death.
remember that we're going to die, it immediately asks the question, or begs the question, what am I going to do with my life?
That's right.
Yeah.
You know, so it changes it. It becomes an opportunity in a way for some people. You know, there's places where there's a lot of death. You see that, you see this will to live, and people really appreciating things, you know, and really they want to make the most of them. They're gonna make most out of something, and that's what she was saying, is that it's kind of hard to achieve that level of appreciation, you know, without the threat of death. It seems like in societies that there's that tendency, and so that is one of its you know, one of the benefits of such a threat.
I have this experience whenever I travel to Asia and then I come back to the United States. I'm reminded how safe we all are here.
Yeah.
And the example that's in my mind is I came back from Bali a few years ago and to Boulder, and everybody seemed very safe and kind of upset or depressed or pissed off compared to the
Yeah.
Balinese, where the living conditions are very much lower than we have. It's not as safe at all. I wonder if those things are related and related to this
Yeah,
conversation.
but then you're saying the people seem happier, they seem more enthusiastic, they seem more motivated. Like it's clearer to them that, you know, they're not going to wait. Um, yeah,
To enjoy the day, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. You know, that's it. And there, so it's some, you know, it's this strange phenomenon, and that creating that safety, especially, you know, in kind of like the imperial kind of consideration, you know, that the safety is happening within an empire, you know, like within the American empire, that while things are very safe here, you know, well, you got the border with Mexico, you know,
Mm-hmm.
very aggressively held, you know, a violent place, like known for violence to occur there, you know, with the US military system pointing out, you know,
Right.
which is the absolute nightmare for anyone on the other end of that on this earth, you know, whether those end up getting pointed towards, you know, whether it's Iraq or Afghanistan or, you know, whatever the place is. um it's so it's just this safety here is kind of, it's built on that, you know, on a very, very aggressive outward stance, that it plays a role in maintaining the safety here. So there's something, you know, also kind of like where they don't have that down there in Bali. It's kind of like they're doing it's them, you know,
Yeah.
this is us, this is how we live. We're not out there part of this or that, or we don't need to be. Maybe there's, you know, there's so many factors, but it's a little more clear, like what's going on globally in relationship to their society. Whereas here, it's cloudy, you know, how we're, you know, the abundance that we have.
Yeah. What's the price we pay for that
Yeah,
safety
yeah,
in so many different ways?
yeah. And the disconnect, you know, the disconnect, and how being more directly connected to your personal life, to your, you know, where your food comes from, where everything comes from around you in your world, how that kind of helps people find a place, and they're less less confused, you know, less distracted, they're more engaged. That, I don't know, you see that a lot in the third world. You see a lot more joy. um you know, it's my experience,
It's
you
my
know.
experience too. We moved from New York City and we got to Boulder, and people were saying hi to us on the street. And I remember being shocked. I was like, what do these people want from us?
Yeah.
Because people were so friendly in Boulder. And then I went to,
Yeah, and there are pockets in the United States where people definitely are more friendly and joyful. You know, there are a lot of places.
but then I went to Bali and came back to Boulder, and everybody seemed pissed off and in a rush. And that was a total mind fuck for me to see how different we
The
approach life,
degrees,
the degrees and what's possible.
yeah,
Yeah.
of human warmth, you know,
Right.
and how, and what is it? And I don't know. That's the curious thing right now, is you get these well, without getting too political, but I remember watching like the Republican National Convention, and some military guy was up there saying, the world is a dark and scary place outside of our borders.
Right.
Like watch out. Like we need to do what we're doing, because out there, you know,
Yikes.
it's barbarians. That's what we're dealing with. It's the Attila the Hun. It's the hordes. Just beating down. Trying to break through. And that's not, if you go, that's not your experience. You go, my family's from Colombia, and I go to Peru a lot, and coming from Colombia to here, it's always when you get to the airport, the shift, there's a dreariness. There's like, whoa, people aren't really that enthusiastic about their daily life, at least those ones, at least who I'm running into there. It's versus over there where they're just, hey, wow, here we are, we're alive,
We're alive.
what's gonna happen next, and we're together.
We're alive and we're together. What more do we need? It's like,
the excitement over that, but it is strange, because it's like, maybe it's beyond our control to some degree, but like you're saying, these factors that get people to appreciate things. And so maybe after World War II, there was a lot more of that sentiment here. Maybe people were, I don't know, it's a mix. You have the traumatized shell shock vibe, the kind of that version, and then you have the other people, well, we gotta band together. We've got to work together, and we're seeing a lot of that. You're seeing a lot of compassionate kind of cooperation is common. I guess people are worried about, buying their guns up, and everything's going to break loose and everyone's going to turn on each other. Like there's that kind of, that's being brought up a lot, but we're not, it's very early in the process, but we're not seeing that right now at all. There still is, like, that's the funny thing here. I think in the States is that there's always surprisingly more warmth here than, once you kind of like back down the political polarization. The American is a friendly person, very often.
We're humans at the end of the day.
And there's room. Yeah, exactly. The humanity doesn't, it's just like maybe it's like the environmental stuff that you see. Wow, it's like 5 days of no driving, and everything is getting better really fast. And just how the nature, the bounce back, the rebound is there. And then within humans, like the humanity is just like a little hop, skip, and a jump away, beyond the artifice of like whatever this belief system, this political system, or whatever it is that's separating people. Then real quickly they realize, oh wow, they're trying to protect their kids. I get it. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that. We see a lot of that.
Yeah, because you are a doctor, I think it's useful. Can we just take a few minutes and do the PSA? Like, what should people be doing if you're listening to this podcast, like, to help us as a collective weather this pandemic?
Well, I don't, I'm not like a total like infectious disease expert, but what I'm following the news, and I'm listening into the recommendations that I'm getting, and I'm reading up on things to help people that I encounter. And it seems like the number one thing globally that just keeps coming back, because, one of the things they were talking about, testing, and they were taking shots at that today, because they're like, well, we're kind of past that point. Like it's already too far spread. Like testing and quarantining people is not necessarily going to be that effective at this stage of the spread. So just again and again and again, and all we're hearing is the social distancing, trying to slow the spread of the virus so that the infection rate slows, and so that the healthcare system can manage those people that are infected and ill, and so that they can, meanwhile in that time period, well, there's more treatment options, or there's more management. But if you can keep things from getting overwhelmed, like you see the footage from Italy, you see the footage from Spain.
It's terrifying. Like
that's really the issue. Yeah, that's the main issue is that. And then, but you're not seeing, I don't know, Germany's death rate is much, much less, so there's different things happening in different places, or maybe the healthcare system isn't as overwhelmed, or I'm not sure the facts of the matter there. But we do know that if, you know, if spread is not slowed, that yes, all the projections that it will overwhelm the hospitals, even though it's only whatever the mortality rate is, whether it's 10% in Italy or 2%, here or somewhere like here or globally. Okay, so most people are going to make it. Yes, I think that's still true, but 2% of the population is like needs a ventilator all at the same time. You don't have it, and
There's a million
then every
ventilators in the United States, millions,
there-
and we don't have them. Yeah.
well, so, I mean, if it, we're trying to see if they can slow the spread and handle it and see what happens, but it's like meanwhile there's a bunch of other people that needed ventilators, before this ever happened.
Right.
Like the ICU was already like there were people in there. And so that's what's going on in Italy, is like you have a car accident, somebody has a heart attack or whatever, they show up and everybody's in the hallway and that's it. So it's like it is in so many other parts of the world where the healthcare system can't really keep up with the severity of illness that comes in our doors. And we're not used to that here, but that's what's coming our way. And so it seems like all the recommendations, the guidelines are about slowing the spread, which is social distancing and now the shelter at home, increasingly across the nation. And now I don't know, they're even saying, well, maybe it's time. And you hear people in Seattle and Washington, and then my friend who's got friends in Hong Kong and China, it's like, since they had the SARS, like as soon as it hits, they're all wearing masks, they're all wearing gloves. Like that, I guess that is a factor. And so Fauci, they was saying maybe people start wearing masks outside to stop the spread, and maybe it helps, and maybe that's worthwhile. So I think it's like being extra careful is the best we can do, as hard as that is, and lonely and difficult, but to save lives. And that's what you hear people. I was watching last night over the New York, ICU, one of the doctors, she's like, well, what's your advice? She says, stay the F home,
Stay the fuck
you know,
home. Yeah.
because she's, she's like, we don't need any more of this. Like, we don't need to be dealing with more of this nightmare. And so I think it's just trying to get people to really take it serious and to be careful, because yeah, most people are going to live and all that, but even Trump woke up, I guess, we heard numbers, there's like 2 million might die, or, things just go as they go. And he's like, whoa, yeah, only and 90% of people are going to live. And oh, that's great. People die like in a month. That's devastating, to everybody, to everybody's families, to everybody's friends and networks. So it just seems like people have to be really careful.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. And I haven't left the house in 2 weeks. I went yesterday for the first time to go drop off a key in a mailbox. And I just think if anybody out there can not leave the house, like don't do it. Get groceries delivered, get whatever you need delivered, and we'll see how this goes. I mean, it's so sad listening to these stories of people essentially suffocating to death because they can't get a ventilator, and being sedated and dying without their family there to hold their hand. It's like incredibly sad.
Well, some of them are dying pretty quick. Like that, there was some guy. He was friends with one of I don't know who it was, but they're just saying this guy wasn't feeling very well, and he's like, "I'm okay." Went to bed, and that's it. He died.
Wow.
So some of them are going like, it's scary and sad to die that way, and many people are dying that way, and many people will die that way.
Yeah. Sad. And do you see, with this huge slowdown of our culture and everybody being forced to stay at home and go in, do you see an opportunity in this for all of us or for our culture?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people are talking about that, like, okay, what's for the people that are healthy and, they're just passing the time and stopping. One thing, obviously there's going to be growing economic pressure for a number of people, worrying about, income and paying their bills and food and all that stuff. So that's, for some people, it's very, very potentially very stressful. There does seem to be initially, maybe the first couple weeks or whatever, wherever we're at in it, where there might be some leeway for a number of people, that there's a little bit of a relief of like, okay, we're all, people, instead of being more stressed, it seems like there's less tension.
Take a
Uh,
rest. Yeah.
Everyone's taking a rest. Like they don't not going to have to commute and deal with the job and deal with this and deal with that. And so it's like, because it was like, oh, how are people going to deal with themselves? And they don't want to deal with themselves, and they don't want to be, they're going to have to deal with their kids and their families. And as tough as that is, it's like that part seems to be going okay. I don't know. That's at least in my like world and around me, it's like a little stressful and all that, but it's
Isn't
kind
that,
of like
yeah.
positive.
Isn't that what we need as Americans or in America is for people to deal with themselves and, cut
Yeah.
back on it, cut back on all the addictions we've got and all the activities and busyness and workaholism. That seems like a big opportunity. I mean, I don't know if people are going to take it or if they're just going to be on Netflix for the rest
Right.
of their life.
Well, I mean, so they're, they're getting a break from it, and and they don't, if they can't, I don't know how aggressive it's going to be as far as, like you said, going outside or, just even be able to go for a walk or all that kind of stuff. As it gets more and more aggressive, yeah, I mean, they're still cooped up, and they're going to have to deal with themselves one way or the other, and their families. My first thought is just that maybe like part of was making things so hard for them and their families and all that was because time was so stressed out. And so if that's at least until the money stress really starts taking hold, like there's a little bit of a break there where maybe it was just like they're just stressed. Maybe there's going to be less stress. Maybe dealing with themselves isn't as hard as they thought.
Mm,
You know, there's some of that.
yeah.
There's
I
some of
like that.
that it's like maybe the society was just like pushing people to the limits. But once again, the humanity, the nature is coming back online, like more than you think, and that's to me, that's really important because one of the things that, and I, just as a separate topic, but when we were talking about the third world and these different things, and, you hear it a lot in these different contexts that people like the kids in Scandinavia or whatever, you hear this, their schools are more effective when they go to less school, when they have more free time. They're smarter, they learn faster. And this company that reduced their hours, is more productive. And so just this kind of, for me, I see that a lot, like in the jungle or something like that, where I was working, where people have a lot of time, and it's like, you're not really going to have, and I'm not, everything's like couched in this like concern for what's going on right now. But just as we explore some of the social phenomena of like people having all this time to themselves, is like you don't have culture without time. No one's going to make like a local cuisine, like the Balinese dish
Mm,
that you tried. Like you don't even develop that in a newly developed American city. Like there's no time for that. There's no time for like some local fashion thing. I mean, there's things that happen, but not the way those kind of traditions that grow. It, I don't know. It seems like it's hard for those things to develop. Local music styles,
yeah. Art.
local art. So like art is what a lot of people do, humans all over the planet Earth, with their free time forever. And like this kind of concept of like, well, the idle hands are, hands of the devil, and people need to stay busy and stay occupied. Otherwise who knows what they'll do. People, and then you go to these places, parts of the world where they're, let's say Brazilian carnival, like that, like it's just like was a community project. Now I'm sure there's more institutions involved, but for a long time, and like where I lived in the jungle, like we decide we're gonna, hey, let's all do this, 50 people, let's all make this thing. Yeah, okay, boom, we put it up, we do it, we have fun, and so many things can be created uh, with time, but you need time. And if all that time is just going towards generating money in the hopes that that money is going to take care of all these issues
Or
that you're
buy you
worried
time
about,
later. Is
yeah,
That's
all
kind
that.
of the racket that we're all kind of running.
So I think it's just like people need more time. The society needs more time that's not just caught up in stressing out about work. And that's not about, we're not trying to say be less productive. We're saying let's be more effective. And so that'll be interesting to see how much can be run in this remotely and with less, you know. So I don't know. I think that it'll be interesting to explore that, because that's important. I think that in the reorientation and wherever we come to after this, who knows? But people are stressed out about their time in our society a lot.
Yeah, I'm getting that to create art or culture, which are in a way synonymous, or even creativity, creativity needs time.
Uh-huh.
It's like a slowing down and a letting of the muse or the genius come knocking and visit and talk to her, or have a conversation.
Yeah. And you can be productive in your other time, but you don't want to be like just drained. It's like, okay, I survived, this hellacious work week. Now I can be creative, but then you're just like, you just want to
Yeah.
you just want to
Uh-huh.
vegetate, So it's like there has to be some balance. You can't be draining people to where they're too exhausted to want to, especially now where, health and fitness and all that stuff is like, it's becoming a more serious issue, like how you take care of yourself and everything. Yeah, like actually it makes a difference when you're dealing with like a strong virus. There's some people, they don't have the choice, or they have this illness, they have this problem, they're fighting these things. But if there are lifestyle considerations that would make it easier, for you to endure, to have more resiliency, like
Yeah.
we say. Like, in other words, so that's, I don't know, that somebody brought it up to me, and I think it is a really worthwhile topic. We've been focused for a long time, like on stress, and I've been focused on like trauma release, trauma healing, and not dealing with stress and all that stuff. But then, some people get bored. Oh, that sounds like we're sick all the time. They don't want to hear about all that stuff. And then it's like, yeah, but that's like, it's in a continuum with resiliency. Resiliency being like our capacity to deal with adversity, because adversity is coming. You know, adversity is coming, and
Part
that's
of
what you're talking
life.
about. It's part of life, and the Balinese, they know it. And then over here, it's like if you make things too sterile and too, you could put it off, but it's part of life, right? Like everyone says, like, oh, if you haven't. So I heard some singers like, oh, if you don't know the blues, then it's like you just live longer, you'll get it. You know,
Yeah,
like it's
right.
coming, it's
Just
coming your
wait.
way. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
coming your way.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's that kind of thing. So then it's like, okay, so you start preparing for that, by you want to be stronger, you want to be, able to deal with it, because it might fall on you, and the institutions may not be able to do everything you think they're going to be able to do for you, you know. So how do you
Yeah.
stay out of trouble?
Yeah. How do you, what can you do? What can we all do for ourselves so that when the dips come, they're not as deep?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's so I think there's a couple, like, there's number one is dealing with like whatever baggage we're carrying, that's hard on us, that's making it harder, um, from our past, from our life, from whatever, from our families, from all that stuff. But then what about like our day to day? Like, how stressful is that? How much is that weighing on us? And of course, there's so many things out of people's control, but what can you do, to make it easier? When you have people like, when you talk to a Balinese person, I mean, this is just a phenomenon. It's easy to say, and maybe you could say it's hard to relate to, but then, if you go through it, or if you know the person, but you have a Balinese person, if they had, I don't know, if you told them, hey, wow, this person's stock market portfolio crashed, and now they're considering committing suicide, I think they'd be like,
They'd
what?
probably be like, what? Yeah.
Yeah. Like, why would you do that? You know, like, who cares, And it's like, there's so much to live for as a poor person.
Yeah.
And so I just think so. It's like shedding, all these things that are feeding our addictions. So that's really important, is like the healing. So that's come up a lot. And for instance, the movie From Shock to Awe, that I like a lot, about these guys, the vets, that they went through ayahuasca healing, and with marijuana and ayahuasca, and also MDMA psychotherapy. And one of them, who was like a real, he's a vet from a family of soldiers and living the American life, and a very brave individual. And he was just like, whoa, our society has just become a repository of trauma. Like, there's all this stuff
All this
that we've
trauma
all
walking around.
that we're not addressing or dealing with, or there's not even like a value assigned to that. Like, oh wow, if you try to work on that, if you try to heal that, it's gonna help make things easier, like on your health, on your mental health, and then also then you drift into this like increased resiliency zone. Like, those things are all interrelated. And so there's so much. And then, mental health, in the sense of like, what's keeping you from being able to access joy, that this Balinese person that you're running into is like, wow, look how joyful. What are they? They're like plugged into, I don't know what,
God,
God
source,
is what you
or
call it.
something.
That's right. The same way the flower is just boom, just sitting so proper under the sun, so excited and so enthusiastic. So it's like, it's connected. And when we're not connected, then we don't access that. We don't have access to that kind of nourishment that seems to be, helping to inspire that person. And so it's kind of like inspiration and its role in health. That's just, it is true. Like I always bring it up, like if it was professional sports, people would take it serious. Like, oh yeah, I mean, this very uninspired performance. They're just,
Right.
and the other person's like, oh my God, look what they just broke all the records, and they were just, I talked to them, and they're just the flow state, or whatever they call it, all the different very dry and kind of secular ways to talk about this connection, and so then this connection is part of what helps people be healthy, and the trauma is part of what like blunts our sensibility to that connection.
Yeah.
And so then, as you address that blunted sensibility by trying to investigate, where have you been blunted, and why, and what is it that's keeping you from wanting to feel, sit and be with yourself, and really use your sensory apparatus to appreciate things. It's like, what's in there, what's blocking things up, and can you deal with that? And when you do, and then all of a sudden this apparatus is like noticing things you didn't notice before. You all these blind spots. All this, people are like, whoa, what a beautiful sunset, Oh my God, look at that.
Yeah, or
And
shedding a
so
tear at the sunset and being
shedding it,
surprised.
yeah.
Being surprised.
Yeah.
Wow, I'm feeling more than I'm more
Yeah.
impacted by nature, by the light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
More connected, so to speak,
Yeah.
in the sense that you actually respond, your physiology responds to it, instead of just being like in your own world, where just like,
Mm-hmm.
grumpy, looking out and not feeling like, or somebody else, you're like, whoa, look, they just see something and they just light up, and they're like, wow. And they've, like a child, more obviously, the most obvious example.
Yeah. I love how you just put that. I feel dropped into a deeper space just from listening to you over the last 5 minutes here.
Well, that's it, because it's all about that. And and I struggle with all this stuff myself, and I'm involved in working with all that. But that's what it is. It's interesting to be around that. Then there's the role of the spiritual healing and the spiritual approach and the spiritual techniques. And one of the people I talked to recently, Marie Chiasson of University of Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine, where they're doing like a live thing right now on Facebook, and it's a heart center. I just looked at right here. It's like anyways, that's gone, but they're doing it. And it's a heart center kind of meditation. And so this idea of like, and then I hang out with, these traditional kind of indigenous shamans and healers in Peru, and then here in Arizona, some of my Dene, my Navajo friends, and the way they approach things and trying to create like a sacred space, you know, trying to help people drop in like you're talking about to where they can feel it. And like, what does that mean? And what does that look like? And how useful that is. And that's what she was saying. She's really into, first I wasn't really like paying the right attention to what she was telling me, but she deals with a lot of education of like fellows and ICU. There's ICU people, intensive care intensivists that are going through the integrative program. And then she's this kind of spiritually oriented doctor that they're learning from. And they're like, whoa, like, I'm not ready to be in that position to tell people ventilator yes, ventilator no. Like that's what they're thinking about.
Right. They're like,
You know,
how do I deal with myself in this situation?
yeah. And my first, my initial reaction, which I'm kind of a little guilty about at the moment, because I was just coming from more of this like the third world perspective, like, oh, my family in Colombia and all that. I was like, well, guess what? Like, they're going to deal with, they're going to, they can think about it as much as they want, but when the time comes, they're going to do it, you know? And she's like, yeah, okay, that's fine. But she was saying, well, maybe some of them should just step back and let whoever feels like they're ready to do it, do it. And I'm like, well, they may not have that luxury. It's back to this thing again, what we were talking about the very safe, you know, world, like, oh, overly safe in Seattle. And then the Balinese is facing danger, but then they feel more invigorated. And so I was like, they may not have that luxury, there might be. So I was coming at her from that angle, but she's like, well, no, she listened to me, but she was also like, well, but perhaps there's ways to help people come into kind of a heart center and to connect to whatever innate harmony is going to help them feel connected while they make these very difficult decisions.
Because really the thing that person is probably highlighting is that there's feelings inside that are too strong, and I don't have the capacity or the ability to feel my feelings in making this decision. So I dissociate and trying to decide. And if I can not dissociate and actually feel the feelings, maybe cry it out, talk to somebody about it, and then go on and make the decisions, I'm going to come out of that experience less traumatized.
Yeah. So then that's like a more conscious society, this like preparing for that. That's like this new level of preparation, which maybe is an old fashioned, like wise approach, like they say, some, I don't know if it was a Zulu or in South Africa. I feel like it was, where they were talking about when the war, the Zulus were very a lot of warrior kind of stuff going on. And when they returned from battle, like, and this, I think it was Credo Mutwa, who just passed away. He's like a South African Zulu wise man and a lot of other things, but a person of knowledge. And he was just saying, we heard that in Europe, in the medieval times, the knight goes and, like, as soon as he comes home from battle with his bloody arm or whatever, he goes and he lays with his woman, directly. And he's like, when our warriors come back from battle, there's a period of days, of decompression that is addressed immediately, to deal with. It's like, yes, they may have to fight, that will come up. We're not going to pretend in that safe zone. Why is this happening? This shouldn't be happening. This shouldn't be happening. It's like, well, okay, these guys, they don't have the police. They don't have a military. They're going to have to go deal with some threat that's come their way. And so then how do they prepare themselves spiritually to go into that and to return from that?
Yeah.
To try to minimize the trauma, like you're saying, or the effects of the impact of the trauma. So as we, bring, like, that's one of my big messages with the book and the other work that I'm doing is, part of my, like, message and how I got involved in, like, speaking about what I was doing was just being a doctor in the States and observing what's going on and as a doctor, and then going down to Peru and getting involved in an ayahuasca healing center where we're receiving people from Europe, from the United States. And it's like, why are they coming all the way out here? And then they end up making progress with the problems, which I know we don't make progress with up there,
Right.
as a doctor,
Coming
right?
from the richest,
Yeah,
most advanced medical system down to Iquitos
yeah,
to get
to
something that we don't have. Yeah.
right, to get something that was cooked on a fire, in the back,
On a pot, right?
literally. And so it's just like my thing is like, well, they're looking for a healthcare system that is going to address the emotional and spiritual dimensions of illness, because that's what is not getting addressed by this, the system that this person is coming from. And once you address those elements, many of them improve rapidly. And so, or, make progress at the very least. And so that's like the thing, so if you started incorporating the emotional and spiritual dimensions into the healthcare system more and more, and like, okay, well, when I was a doctor, they tried to prepare us, we had discussions about that, but there was so much to learn and there was so much going on and everything. And it's so intense. And I remember the first day we went to the hospital, they're like, okay, everybody, we're going to the hospital tomorrow and you'll be assigned to go meet your first patient in the hospital, So you walk into the hospital, and if you haven't spent that much time in the hospital, you kind of forget that nobody wants to be in the hospital. Like, that's the
Right.
last place anybody wants to be. So if you're there, it's because things are bad, and in general. And so they handed out our different cards, like, here's you, here's you, here's you. It's like, oh, you guys got the burn unit. We're like, burn unit? What? Like, this is
Ooh,
our first day. What are we going to the burn unit? Well, somebody has to go. Go on, guys. Go to the burn unit. And as soon as we
jeez.
got out of the elevator, one of my colleagues he passed out, man. He just like broke his
Yeah.
teeth out, had to go to the emergency room. I was like,
Ooh,
so I
jeez.
mean, just the intensity, that's being
Right.
dealt
Just
with.
thrown into the fire, right?
At some point it happens, you know what I mean? It's like, it's the Zulu warrior situation. It's like, you are going to have to deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, okay, how do we prepare you? And so that's what's happening now, is like this Center for Integrative Medicine, Andrew Weil, that group is saying, okay, let's start the heart-centered stuff. Let's help people. Like, okay, what like you're saying, do they need to work through some baggage that's gonna, of course, when they're pushed and shoved in the intensity, like, that's gonna come forward, that's gonna come up, there it is,
Yeah.
and so it's like, and is that gonna be too much to deal with that and this other thing? And so we're realizing, oh, we got to address that. We got to address that stuff so people can make more clear-headed decisions and more heartfelt decisions. We have to help them.
What would
So
you say
this,
to,
yeah.
sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it. Go ahead.
I was going to say, what would you say to a doctor or a healthcare worker to prepare them before they go into the hospital in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks as this pandemic progresses? Like, how would you prepare people? What would you say to them?
Well, I mean, a lot of them have already seen a lot, like if they're working in the ICU, you know, when I was in training, I don't know what the stats are now, but ICU is like 50% mortality rate.
Phew.
If you're going to the intensive care, it's because you're at the verge of dying most of the time, or you need to be supervised because you're in a life-threatening state. And so they've seen a lot of death, like every day people die in the hospital. So as far as the hospital workers, I think they have experience, with that to a degree. And then it's like, but then, yeah, I guess it's the overwhelm. Many people haven't experienced that the way they might have experienced in some other countries, where there's less resources, where all of a sudden they can't even, and then there's emergency rooms in the United States that are, they're saying there's 8-hour wait times or 12-hour wait times. And so there's some pretty rough conditions here within the US, and that's being exposed more and more and more, all this talk of we're number one and all that kind of stuff. But, the increasingly reminiscent, third world conditions of a lot of locations within the States, you know.
Yeah.
And so those people are also like, many of them are pretty hardened to, they've already come to those decision points, where they weren't able to help somebody because they weren't able to get to them in time or whatever it is. But as that grows and increases, and then, which is what we're seeing, in New York and some of these places where, it's pretty rough already. It sounds like in Queens where it's really getting hit hard. And so they're overwhelmed emotionally, but they're sticking it out. They're still enduring. They're in the middle of it. So it's like, I don't know what I could tell them, like many of them have seen more of it than me. So I don't know that I would be ready to like give them advice, but I think it's just that aspect is that, you know, there's there's things we can do to try to help prepare us for that. And so there's a heart center meditation that U of A Center for Integrative Medicine is putting out as an example. There's other types of techniques that people can do, to prepare themselves emotionally. And I think there's a lot of spiritual techniques that are effective and helpful in helping us deal with that stuff. Whether it's finding a calmer, centered place, or if it's grieving, well, we got to grieve, and letting some stuff go. And and then afterwards, that there's a lot of support, to deal with that. Maybe you're going to need there's are going to people who are going to be like PTSD'd out from this kind of stuff, and
Yeah, how could there
and so
not
that's
be?
like, well, we have like a growing, we're making progress in that area, and we're learning a lot about how to help people through that. And so that there's support and there's knowledge. So we, it's not going to be like, it doesn't have to be permanent damage. There's ways for us to come through this better than we have before. We know more, we can help more. And so I think it's just like trying to help people find hope through it. And that's difficult and terrible and nightmarish, and is going to wear people down. But try to help them, find a little bit of light so they can keep going.
Yeah. I had Rick Doblin on the show a while back, and we were talking about treating trauma right after it happens, like not waiting for some of the people in the MAPS trials with MDMA, waiting, 10 years or 20 years, I think was the average. But
Yeah,
I like that idea of helping people access the ability or the opportunity to let go of this stuff that gets stuck in our systems as we're going through these traumatic events close to the trauma, so it doesn't impact our lives so much going
that's
forward.
right. Yeah. Well, that's what, that's what the growing knowledge base around trauma healing and the potential for trauma healing, and just recognizing how important that is to try to nip things in the bud. And, so now they want to treat younger people. MAPS is curious about that.
Yeah, so
And
exciting. I'm just
yeah, so that's
really,
one option. Or, and then there's, because it's, let's say it's some kind of abuse that somebody went through or whatever, and then they have to, there's a shame around that, so they closet that away and doesn't get addressed for forever, until they start to break down, and then they just have to come out. But if you let people know, like, hey, this is something that it can get better, like it's better to jump on it, better to get on it and get through it. And that's wonderful, and that's what I bring up all the time, that in my book, I talk about a Vietnam vet that I brought down. There was a family friend of ours, and he would talk about, he made a lot of progress through ayahuasca related healing and Shipibo techniques. And he says that when he would go to like his, group therapy for PTSD at the VA, and he sees these young guys from Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're looking across the table, the room, to him and say, oh my God, am I going to have this for the rest of my life? You know, because that's, so I think it's just, we're learning so much, and it's so exciting. What MAPS is doing is so exciting. And that's why we're running our epigenetics research project with that study with MAPS, Modern Spirit, our nonprofit, which is about demonstrating the value of spiritual healing in modern healthcare. Like, that's our mission. And so this incredible healing and transformation that so many of the study participants are going through in the MAPS trial, the MAPS, MDMA assisted psychotherapy for treatment-resistant PTSD. And like you said, on average, they have, I think, 18 years of treatment-resistant PTSD, the average person entering the study. And then they go through a 3-month intervention which is primarily therapy, with 3 MDMA sessions in their protocol of assisted psychotherapy. And then they have but then they follow up with them, after 12 weeks of that, with the 3 sessions and all the therapy and in their protocol with their like skilled people involved. And a year out, they have 67% of them don't have it anymore. They don't have PTSD.
yeah.
So that's a revolution in psychiatry and in trauma healing. And it just points to like a whole potential for healing. And so we, Modern Spirit, my background was in ayahuasca healing, where I was seeing some really big transformations happen for people in what seemed like very kind of embedded illness, physicalized illness. And so it's like, how did this, like I say, these spiritual techniques, which promoted this profound emotional healing, lead to these big changes in their physical and mental health? And so then we raised the topic of epigenetics, which a lot of people were bringing up, and a lot of people are bringing up, that epigenetics would be one of the places where this trauma imprints into our biology, that affects the way our genes are expressed, that the memory of the trauma is, maladaptively imprinted into the system. And then that stays with the person in a stable way for, like we said, for 18.5 years for these people going into the trial. And we don't know if that's, so there's a growing body of research that, yeah, it seems like this epigenetics plays a big role in PTSD. And if we see that kind of healing, then maybe there is an epigenetic shift happening through the MDMA assisted psychotherapy trial. So that's what we're doing. And we feel like that's a big deal because we have the opportunity to try to, talking about bridging these worlds, about showing the biomedical model in perspective. Like, hey, look what happened when we helped open these people's hearts, when we held them in a sacred way. Like, look what was possible. We were able to let go and shed and grieve and transform and forgive and, find self-love again and find gratitude again and find compassion again, through this. And then, it would be really interesting to see if that's related to an epigenetic shift around the way their stress response system is working. Because according to the data, their stress response is working very differently because they don't have PTSD anymore by criteria.
Right.
So if we can find that in the physiology, so that's what the Modern Spirit Epigenetics Project is about. Yeah, so we're doing that right now.
Yeah, can you give us an overview of Modern Spirit? I mean, you kind of already did, but just this is a fascinating project, and I'd love to hear more about where it came from and where it's going.
Yeah, so Modern Spirit just came up as an idea of I wanted to. When we first started Modern Spirit, it was just about that. It was like I was, down in Peru doing this spiritual healing focused treatment and getting really impressive results with a lot of people, and that led to my book, which is The Fellowship of the River, Medical Doctors' Exploration to Traditional Amazonian Plant Medicine, which was my journey, but also then a presentation of cases that I saw as a doctor. And then also like an exploration into what are the scientific mechanisms that might be connecting, with these spiritual healing techniques to the kind of healing we're seeing. And it was partially inspired by ayahuasca, the idea to focus on the epigenetics. And then that led me to focus in that direction. And then I discovered that other people were already also focused in that direction. So Modern Spirit was, we weren't, at the time that it started and in its first form, it's like I wanted to be involved in education. Like let's develop programs in education, like this, this heart center program that they were doing at U of A, like programs to educate people that you could have CME, you could have education credit towards your license. Because I was like, I have to do all these CMEs for my medical license, but so much of it is just bureaucratic BS, like click, click, click. No one's getting anything out of it, or I wasn't getting a lot out of like some of the programs I was being asked to do. I was like, what if you could have some real content on there that could be inspirational and interesting? So I wanted to do that, and we still haven't done that, but we're working on it. But what I did do was make some lectures and write and write the book eventually around that kind of information. And then, we had a team of people that were like, what, your ideas about the epigenetics, we agree. A guy from Yale, Ben Kalmendi, and David Rabin from, at the time he was at in Pennsylvania and Pittsburgh. And so they were researchers and were saying, hey, this is a cool idea. And we wanted to do this with ayahuasca. We're like, this would be really cool to do with ayahuasca. And we thought about doing it to see it. It was hard to do that kind of study in the jungle. And meanwhile, the MAPS trial is going on and they're getting these incredible results. And so he said, wow, if we could capture that. And so one of them had a connection to the MAPS trial. And so we approached MAPS and and then move forward. So now it's based at USC, and MAPS, the different trial centers, are collecting saliva samples like you do for Ancestry.com or whatever to get the DNA samples all over. And we're getting ready that we have enough numbers of those samples, then do a laboratory analysis of those samples, which is the expensive part of the study. And it's why I'm not, why isn't more epigenetic research happening around spiritual healing? Well, because it's very expensive, so you need to fund. It costs money. That's why most of the research is not happening that you think should be happening.
And this is more intense. Sorry to interrupt. This is more intense than like a 23andMe analysis. Is that why it's?
Yeah, well, because it's not a 23andMe is, based on genetic research that's been going on for decades. So epigenetic research and the techniques are just in the earlier stages of development. So there isn't like this, mass production kind of array. There's people are developing that, but this is a new area. Like before, looking at the DNA sequence is what they're doing. So now we're looking at like these different ways that the DNA strands are modified, or the proteins around the strands are modified with these different molecules. For example, these methyl groups that get put on there that somehow are linked to this kind of cellular memory. Somehow the way they're put on there, it's like telling the story of these traumas, and it goes on there and it affects the way the cortisol receptor is functioning. So you have these the cortisol hormone, that's a stress response hormone that's released in fight or flight and has all these inflammatory, consequences and implications. Like that's an example of the kind of gene and that gene region and associated genes that are affected by trauma. And so when they've been looking at the region and seeing if PTSD, like, are those people, is there some like group correlations? Do we see tendencies that we could say, look, these alterations in the methyl groups around the cortisol receptor are linked to PTSD? And so they're saying yes, and there's other regions to look at, and there's other ways to look at the epigenome in its entirety. So then that's a new field, and the laboratory analysis of that is in development. Where to focus on. Do you focus on the whole, all of the genes, or just certain gene regions, and what does that do? So that's all new, and so it's in development. So they're just doing it like, it costs more money to do it that way. It's not laid out for you.
Yeah. So you're swabbing the participants before they start the treatment and after.
Yes.
And then when you have enough data together, when you have enough swabs, you're gonna bring it all together, do an analysis, and then
try to publish. If we find something, we may not find anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I guess
it would be nice to see it because it would support our idea. Yeah, it would be nice to find something one way or the other. Yeah. The hypothesis is that yes, that the people that heal from PTSD through MDMA assisted psychotherapy will see shifts in their epigenetics. And the way their genes are regulated. The DNA sequence won't be changing, but the way that DNA sequence is expressed by affecting the machinery around the sequence, the way that sequence meets the world through the epigenetics, that's going to be altered. That filter that affects the way genes are expressed. That makes the difference between these two twins that have the same DNA, but then they're, different, their bodies are different in this way or that way because their epigenetics are not the same. The way that, you have a same DNA in your red blood cell that you have in the cells in your tongue, but they are programmed differently. And so the genes are expressed differently. The code has quite a versatility of expression. Yeah. And that versatility is affected by trauma. And so then there's also reason to believe that versatility is affected by therapeutic intervention.
Man, I'm on tenterhooks waiting for this research.
Everybody, well, we need the money. We need the money. So that's the problem. So we've raised a little more than half of the money that we need. So we have enough money to pay our, investigator and order the kits and send the kits and ship them all out to MAPS and do that phase. But we're raising the money for the second half, which is the laboratory analysis. So we have a crowdfund. It's on through modernspirit.org. You can find the crowdfund. And I know this is a terrible time to ask for money from everybody, and so we understand. But it's a crowdfund, so we're just, $5 or whatever
$5,
people can
$10,
spare.
$20.
But yeah, that's it, or more if you can. But we understand people have other priorities right now, so we're not asking people. We respect that. But whoever is able to do it, because why? Because it might help us understand the kind of trauma healing that we may need to do, after this.
Yeah, 100%. And what do you think, if we can prove that going through these therapeutic interventions changes the expression of our genes epigenetically, what do you think that will make available? Or
I think it'll revolutionize things in the sense that now you can start trying to understand, or at least consider and talk about what I would call emotional biology. So then emotional biology, and in my book, I talk about this concept that, spiritual well-being manifests in emotional health. So when we're talking about how somebody is more heart-centered and more prepared and less triggered, to be able to go in and has that resiliency available to them, because I don't know, they just a lot of support, a lot of, let's say, maybe it's spiritual practice, maybe they're from a very loving background, maybe they weren't really traumatized that much, all these different factors that seem to make it easier for them to be in what would people might consider to be a calm emotional state, not an overly reactive or triggered emotional state, that they're more perhaps they have easier access to creativity, perhaps they have easier access to this connection and this joy that you're talking about earlier. So that emotional biology, trying to understand what are the factors that can feed into that. So then there's many different areas where, like, we're learning that emotional trauma seems to play such a very significant role in, let's say, depression, in anxiety, in PTSD, in drug addiction. So it's like, if you're going through like a treatment that's not really shifting you at this, and these are speculations, this is a big speculation. But let's say you have like this epigenetic trauma imprint, and it can be inherited as well. There's a growing body of evidence around
right,
ancestral trauma.
Heal it or pass it on to the next generation.
Heal it or pass it on.
Kick the can down the road.
So there's that possibility. Yeah. So then you'd have this idea, this repository of trauma, all this accumulated baggage. Let's say what we were talking about before within a society. So you're trying to heal the family line, and help increase this access. So let's say there's a treatment for addiction, let's say you have this rehab center, but they just keep coming back, it's not really impactful. Nothing's really happening. They have really poor success rate. And it's like, okay, or this PTSD treatment, that's like, they had a really poor success rate. These guys are still have treatment resistant PTSD, or this treatment resistant depression, or this treatment resistant anxiety. And then there are other, psychosomatic and other autoimmune and, related problems that I bring up in the book, for example. So you have that, and these people are treated like they have a chronic disease. It's never going to get better.
Yeah. And
then we realize, it's like this thing has embedded itself and is like imprinted at an epigenetic level. So now we need to do something that's going to help shift things at that kind of level. And what we may learn is that what the kind of thing that shifts things at that level are deep emotional experiences, and deep emotional healing experiences may have that potential. Psychotherapy, we know, has that potential. We know meditation affects epigenetics. So shifts in consciousness.
We know that meditation affects epigenetics?
Yes, that's established through the research. Wow. So this is an area. So this idea that
it's been my experience. I feel different when I meditate.
Right. No, they're saying that in the short term and the long term, there's evidence around epigenetics with meditation. That in the short term, advanced meditators are able to shift the regulation of certain genes at the epigenetic level in a 1 day type of interval. And then in the long term, that you do see shifts
That's
around
so
these things.
cool.
So that speaks to this, like, this sensitive, vulnerable part of us, that the epigenetics, the emotional biology, are very sensitive, in fact, to emotional trauma, to our relationships, to our consciousness state. It's a very curious sensitivity that we're carrying inside the cells, and that addressing that system through these different ways. So then all of a sudden it increases thought around, hey, wow, what about, different kinds of spiritual healing techniques? What about certain ceremonial experiences that people go through without psychedelics, where people see these? What about spontaneous healings that happen in response to, spiritual healing phenomenon, or to Reiki, or to this, or to, plant medicine, Chinese herbal medicine, acupuncture, like all this? It's a whole new responsiveness system for us to look at, to try to understand therapeutics.
Yeah, I love it. It. You write in the book, I wrote down a few quotes here. When the emotional body is sick, the physical body cannot get well. And then another one is, in chronic diseases in which the emotional body is ill, lasting healing will not be achieved until we address the needs of the heart and soul.
Yeah. And so those are quotes that are based on the cases presented, right? So I'm saying, look at these people. They were, we're talking about the PTSD trial with MDMA, for example, 18 years treatment resistant. And then all of a sudden now they're going into a therapy style that has psychedelics on board. I mean, MDMA, which is not, maybe some people think of it not. Anyways, it's considered psychedelic, and that the therapists themselves are also like, and I've encountered some. I mean, the MAPS has definitely picked some cream of the crop therapists to run the trial. So it's it's important to consider. It's like it's not just anybody, and it's not just the MDMA.
Right.
It's how they do it. And so how they do it, and the ones that I've encountered, very graceful people, very open-minded people, and they're going to walk people through, intense experiences of feeling, universal love consciousness and connectedness through the MDMA sessions, and on top of, profound emotional processing of grief, et cetera, et cetera. Like it's a wide open space that is the kind of space that traditionally would be considered a sacred space, where you need people who have developed themselves in the same way that we're talking about. How do you prepare yourself to turn off the ventilator? Like, what can you do? How do you prepare yourself for death? Like, what can we do? So these people have gone to a lot of lengths to prepare themselves to go to wherever the person needs to go, whatever hell they need to go through and experience and work through and resolve and process. In the same way, like in the ayahuasca shamanism, it's very similar. Like our preparation is very much about that kind of internal work that's going to try to prepare you to be ready to address, some very difficult things, or maybe overly beautiful things, all of it. And so that being said, there's a spiritual context, is what I would just say, that is allowing for this emotional healing to happen. A spiritual context in the traditional, universal, and that's why I like some of the Native American approaches, and that's beyond judgment. It's not associated to any kind of political agenda or some kind of social agenda, without judgment, and safe. And so that's the other thing. You can't play around and predate on people in these vulnerable states. It has to be committed to safety, and committed to wholeness, and committed to this open-minded, open-hearted, beyond judgment, and hold that space for people, and so that they can go through this. And so that's this concept of, like, until that emotional healing. And so then in my book, that's part of the argument, is that the emotional biology piece, I'm like, this is a real thing. We know that we have emotions. We know that fear, anger, joy, we feel these things in our body, and tears run down people's cheeks because their water's coming out of their eyes. This is a physiologic reality. Laughter pulses through your body and your being.
Yeah.
And so all that kind of stuff. So there is an emotional body. And I explore the argument further by saying that the stress research that I was exposed to, where they talk a lot about this psychoneuroendocrine immunologic network, this network that's involved in the stress response system that helps control the cortisol levels, everything we were just talking about. It's not just woo-woo. It's the emotional body. It's the part of us that we have enough evidence, I think, to say, like, look, this system in PTSD, we know it was emotional trauma that disturbed the system. No one's arguing that.
Yeah.
It wasn't that they gave them a pill, maybe in some cases, but I'm saying it wasn't like an environmental exposure to some toxin. It wasn't a virus. It wasn't, cancer.
Abnormal brain chemistry of
et cetera, et
unknown.
cetera. We know that it was the trauma. If we want to be honest, if it was us or our family or our loved one, we would just cut to the chase. Yeah, we know that it's
something happened to that person and they haven't been the same since.
There's an energy, that as a way of talking about it, however you want to talk about it, they haven't been the same since. And in fact, their body doesn't function the same since.
Yeah.
Their psychology doesn't function. They have nightmares. Their fight or flight autonomic nervous system is hyperreactive. Their cortisol levels are not functioning normally. The inflammatory milieu is not functioning normally. Adrenaline levels are not functioning normally. So there's very material, very real emotional, biological phenomena associated. And then they go through this really profound emotional healing process, and their body starts working well again. That's a real thing,
Yeah.
So it's something we need to think about. So that's what the study is trying to push in that direction, get the biomedical, because once you bring the emotional component in, that is the window to the spirit. And that's our feeling.
Once you can show in it, right? Once you can show in hard data that the emotional body is changing, then I guess it becomes more accessible to people with a more materialistic or old school mind.
Correct. Who, yes, that's exactly right. And they need that to feel safe about something like this. And so we're trying to provide that, because we want to let them know this is important and interesting. But yeah, there is a common sense component to it. Maybe the overly materialist perspective goes against some common sense. And I don't blame them. I mean, yeah, a lot of people do, and so, but there's room there to argue and debate. So we're trying to get the data.
Yeah. Yeah. Wonderful. So the project, people can find out more about that at modernspirit.org.
Correct.
There's a fundraiser.
There's a link to the crowdfund through that website.
Yep. I supported the project. And if you're listening to this, please help support the project also, so that we can get over the line and get this research done and keep moving this important work forward. And the book is The Fellowship of the River. And the tagline is a medical doctor's
exploration to traditional Amazonian plant medicine.
Yeah. And it's beautifully written with a foreword by Gabor Mate. And so that's available on Amazon. Buy it, read it. There was one thing, we have just a couple minutes left, but I wanted to, this has been bugging me since the very beginning of our conversation today. You talked about the person at the Republican National Convention saying it's a dark and scary world outside of our borders. And when I hear that, it brings up for me this idea that has been developing for me, that the legacy of trauma for a certain segment of the population makes the world seem like a dangerous place.
Well, in America, I mean, when we were growing up, or when I was growing up, I mean, very few Americans had passports. It's a bordering on like a North Korean like isolation from the earth, and being from like a bicultural family where you go all the time growing up, and you realize these guys don't have any concept of like what's out there. But then the soldiers are the ones going out.
Right. And so the reports and getting shot at and seeing their buddies get killed and then coming back. And
you can't blame them for that, that it's like, of course, their experience is is
Right.
a horror. And so I respect that. But it's like now more people are traveling than before, and we're hearing other reports of what's going on in Bali. And my family's from Colombia, and it's pretty bad press, but a lot of people are going there nowadays and they're really loving it and they're having a blast. And there's so many places to go and enjoy. So that's good, that we're seeing more travel, because I think it helps us learn about life on Earth.
Yeah, and if a certain segment of the population in America sees the world through that lens of the accumulated trauma of families that have been in wars, or families that were brought up under authoritarian type of parenting and structures, well, then it makes sense why we have people that see the world so differently on both
Yeah,
sides. And I think that for me gives me hope that the psychedelic renaissance and the availability of these treatments will actually shift our politics as a nation over time.
it's quite possible, and that is the beauty of it, because these same vets, that, like you said, have been kind of jaded to the world, and there's so many families affected by that in our World War One, World War Two, Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, etc., etc. um these guys are saying we're not getting helped, and we don't want this anymore, and we're not going to wait around. They're very frustrated, and there's more knowledge and the internet and more understanding about what they were risking themselves for, and what exactly was involved and what happened. And so they're the ones calling for this, and so they are asking for, they're pursuing very liberal treatments, with this marijuana movement is fueled by
Ayahuasca.
that,
Yeah.
ayahuasca, and now MDMA psychotherapy, and all of them. And so it's interesting how it's them, you know that are well, and part of the beauty of it is that these guys are very brave people. Like, that's a
Right.
separate category. And so it's fun, like, from shock to awe, watching these type of guys go. They're like, whatever, bring it
Yeah.
on,
Bring it
let's
on.
do it, you know. And you're like, wow, other people are so anxious, so it's and so police, and firefighters are all, they're coming into the MDMA trial. They're expanding it in that direction to deal with, like you said, these conservative sides of society that are the ones that have been traumatized by violence.
It's like the
And
part of the brain that regulates against external threat is overregulated or overstimulated,
that's
hyperactive.
right. That's right. It's kind of like the guy Free Solo, the movie. Did you see that Free Solo movie? The
Yeah,
guy,
Alex Honnold, the
yeah, they
climber.
were asking his amygdala. They put him in the MRI, and his fear center in the brain was like nothing. And they're like, so, well, yours just doesn't like activate. And he's like, well, maybe mine's just tired. You know.
He beat it into submission. Yeah.
That's right. I don't know, but yeah, all that stuff. Emotional biology.
Yeah. Well,
Emotional biology affecting our politics is what you're talking about.
yeah, right.
Epigenetics affecting our politics, our social systems, and realizing that we need to bring healing in to, let people maybe make some decisions from a little more heart-centered place, when sometimes that's what you need.
Yeah. I love it. This is giving me hope. And I hope if anybody, people who are listening, hope it's giving you hope as well. Again, the project is www.modernspirit.org.
Correct.
So please go there, back the project. Joe, your website is drjoetafur.com. And the book, which is available on Amazon, is The Fellowship of the River, a medical doctor's exploration into traditional Amazonian plant medicine, which, as I said, is beautifully written. And so go grab that. Any final words, Joe, before we finish?
No, that's it. I mean, just let's all hope for the best and stay safe and take care of each other, during this tough time. And, we talked about a lot of things, interesting things that I think are all going to be relevant.